All right, welcome back, everybody. This time we've got our next presenter ready for us, and Kelsey is her name, and she's going to introduce us to ceremonial grade matcha. So, just a quick introduction about Kelsey. Kelsey is the founder of Sakucha, a chado or the Japanese tea practitioner. In other words, in Japanese, Yurosenke. Okay, sorry, I hope I got it. Thank you. She is a registered yoga and meditation teacher under the Yoga Australia and Meditation Association of Australia, and a chartered accountant who is passionate about personal and planetary well-being. Kelsey, you've got a lot on your belt. Kelsey will be introducing what ceremonial grade matcha is, matcha cultivation, and how matcha is produced, as well as the health benefits a bowl of tea can offer. So let's give Kelsey a very big, warm welcome.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining. Sorry to have given you such a long bio there, but yes, it's kind of by way of background. I'm a Japanese tea practitioner, and this all came about when I made a journey to Kyoto in 2019. I'd been working as a chartered accountant and studying towards that for nearly a decade, and reached a point in my life where I really needed to refresh myself. I wasn't very well. I'm a recovering workaholic, and I think many people can relate to that struggle with the fast pace that we have today in our modern lives. And I really found a lot of refreshment and healing in the tea room in Japan. A number of serendipities led me there. I quit my job, packed up, sold everything, and ended up living in Kyoto. I found a share house, and one of the lovely women living there gave me a library book all about chado, or the Japanese way of tea. I ended up closing the book, having been really inspired, and just got on with trying to find myself a life and routine in Japan. And one day stumbled upon what just looked like a cafe or a tea house, tea shop. And it happened to be owned by the author of the book. And I had not planned to visit, had no idea where it was in town, and walked inside, and he was there that day, a sensei. So we struck up a conversation, and I told him I'd been inspired and wanted to learn more about the practice. And he invited me to join his group of very dedicated tea practitioners, and start doing lessons and learning all about the spirit of tea in Japan. So that's my kind of personal journey into discovering matcha tea. And upon returning to Australia, having received a lot of the physical benefits from matcha, and we'll talk about the health benefits and what that could offer you in terms of just drinking the tea, but also having that very mindful experience of what it's like to be in a tea room, I wanted to pass that on and to give that to people here in Australia. So that's kind of the birth story of Sakucha and how it bloomed and came to be. And Sakucha comes from two Japanese words. So saku is to bloom, and you might have heard of the sakura, or the beautiful cherry blossoms in Japan. So to bloom, and cha being tea. And our mission really is to help everyone flourish with a mindful tea practice and through simply drinking a bowl of tea. So today I'd love to talk to you about the tea that I love, matcha. I do really enjoy lots of different kinds of tea, and I think everyone here today is a tea lover. But I find matcha in particular, having had that experience in the tea room and some of the key health benefits, is really refreshing, can help calm our mind and really nourish our body at the same time. So I've just got here, today's going to be very practical and hands-on. I'd love to answer questions, and we'll make a bowl of tea together, and I'd love to show you the tea powder and talk all about it. So it's not going to be with slides or anything formal in that way, but we've got here two kinds of matcha. So today I'm going to talk to you about the 5 things to look for when choosing your matcha green tea, and then throughout that we'll talk about the cultivation, production, and health benefits as well. So you'll see here I've got 2 different kinds. Over on this side is organic ceremonial grade matcha grown in Uji, Japan. And on this side, we also have an organic matcha grown in Uji, Japan. And so you can notice that a product which is having the same name and grown in the same region, both marketed and sold here in Australia, can look vastly different. And some of the key things to note, probably the most obvious, is the colour, and that's where we'll start with our discussion on ceremonial grade matcha. So the colour of a really high quality matcha will be a beautiful, vivid green. And the reason for that is Matcha Green Tea is a very pure tea. So along with all other Japanese green teas, it's not oxidized. So there's a steaming process that happens straight after harvest, which locks in all the nutrients and the beautiful flavors of green tea and inhibits the enzymes that would cause oxidation of the tea. So you get that really beautiful green color. But also quite unique to matcha green tea is that it's shade grown before harvesting the leaves. And what this does is really boost nutrients, including chlorophyll, to the tea plant. And this will result in this really bright green color when the chlorophyll is boosted to the leaves. What's happening in that process is by blocking almost 95% of the light throughout the shading process that happens in spring, the plant becomes a little bit stressed and it wants to maximize the opportunity for photosynthesis. So that's why we get a lot of chlorophyll in the leaves and a lot of other nutrients are sucked up from the soil. So it's a very, very nutrient dense leaf by the time it comes to harvesting time. So that's how we get the beautiful bright green colour. It's also maintained because of the very careful production techniques that follow harvest. So as mentioned, there's that steaming process which stops oxidation. It's ground very slowly. So you'll also notice about matcha, it's a ground tea powder. So quite different to other loose leaf, if you will, teas. We're drinking the whole powder, the whole leaf as a powder here. And when grinding happens, it's ground very carefully, very slowly to maintain the nutrients and the flavors in the tea leaves. So that's our first checkpoint, is what is the color of your matcha? There should be no undertones of yellow or brown, like on this side, which could indicate a few steps in the process have been missed. It could be that these tea leaves weren't shade grown adequately, not long enough in the shade, using parts of the plant which aren't the most tender new shoots of the tea plant harvested in spring, or poor production methods, storage that could lead to this becoming oxidized and losing its nutrition and color. So our second point is the aroma of tea. So our beautiful ceremonial grade matcha will have a very fresh, vegetal and slightly sweet aroma when it hits the tea bowl. And if you've had the opportunity to have a bowl of matcha, whether that's in Japan or Australia, that smell is the best thing in the morning. It really just awakens your senses and just makes you feel really refreshed for the day ahead. So that's what to look for in the aroma of your tea. If you're getting something that doesn't really have that beautiful aroma that wafts up, you might have lost some freshness in the tea, or it hasn't been, again, shade grown, which leads to that beautiful kind of sweetness and a different flavor profile, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The next part of our 5-part checklist is the texture of the tea. So I can show you again our plate here. We've got the 2 different kinds of tea. A little bit hard on video, but if you were to actually take a matcha tea powder, you notice that it's really silky fine. And if you were just to put this on your skin, it just sinks right in. It's such a fine, smooth powder. And that's because it's been ground really finely. Something else that leads to a beautiful texture in matcha tea is, again, the shade growing process. So those leaves that also suck up all of the nutrition, they become wider and thinner and therefore more tender due to shade growing. The leaf flattens out and tries to capture all of the sunlight again. So when you grind those leaves, you're getting a much smoother, silkier matcha powder. as opposed to a lower quality tea where shade growing might not have happened, and using kind of coarser parts of the plant. The texture will also be silky fine because of that really good grinding process. So we're grinding it down and getting a really silky texture. And what you'll notice when you make a bowl of tea with a really high grade matcha is that it will be suspended in the water really effectively. So you get a beautiful creamy bowl of tea, as opposed to a bigger particle which can just sink to the bottom of the bowl, and you won't get a really nice foam on top. So after we finish our talk today, I'd love to make a bowl of matcha with you and show you what that creamy foam could look like just simply with water and whisk together. That's number 3, the texture, both as the powder and in your bowl of tea. So number 4, we've got the taste. So unfortunately, a lot of people have had the experience with matcha where they've just been really shocked by the bitterness of the tea. And whilst bitter flavours is definitely part of the flavour profile of tea, especially green tea, kind of like a bitterness and astringency comes because of the nutrition, the antioxidants and catechins in the tea. It shouldn't be overwhelmingly bitter. And a shade-grown tea, because it does have other nutrients, and in particular L-theanine, which is an amino acid that's really boosted in the shade-growing process, you get a really beautiful balance of bitterness, sweetness, and umami savoury flavours. So you're really looking for a matcha tea that is well balanced with those 3 things, and definitely should have minimal bitterness. Although a little bit of bitterness is refreshing, and I think we hear in some of those ancient cultures that the medicine is bitter, especially in Chinese culture. So we know that bitterness is healthy. We think about those bitter vegetables that we eat. But yes, we want a balance of those things, not it to be overwhelming. So that's number 4, taste. Other people, I'm trying to think of other words to describe tea, and the really interesting thing about tasting teas is that it really is like an alchemy, and the taste can change depending on what's going on in your own biome in your mouth. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear different people's thoughts about what a tea can taste like, because that can be very individual as well. The other really interesting thing about the taste of matcha, and as a brand, we've decided to offer single origin and single cultivar matcha tea. So there's a couple of different ways that matchas can be crafted. And one is the art of tea blending, which is a process where tea leaves are selected for their properties and blended to create kind of year-on-year consistency and taste for a tea. We've chosen to actually offer single origin tea. So we work directly with organic tea farms in Japan. And what this means is that we know exactly the path that tea is taken from the tea farm to your tea bowl. And it also means that you get to experience nature in a cup. So you're experiencing what's happened across the tea season to the tea trees in terms of all of the conditions and what's gone into creating the tea for that season. So I think that's a really beautiful part of having a single origin tea as opposed to tea blending, and having that kind of, again, that mindful approach to tea where we can notice the subtle differences and the changes in every bowl and every season that we get tea. So they're my kind of thoughts on taste and what to look for in quality. So no matter kind of the subtle differences, you're definitely looking for something that has that full-bodied taste experiences with the sweetness and the umami as well. And finally, out of the 5 points is the cost. So it can be very tempting to have a look at the matcha on the market and go for something that is on the cheaper end of things. And you can see teas that range very vastly in how much they cost. And you might find something that's 2 or 3 times more expensive than another matcha tea grown in the same region that's, say, even organic. But as we've kind of discussed throughout this, the 5 points, there's a lot of work that goes into creating and artfully preparing a beautiful matcha tea. And it's very labor intensive, especially for an organic farm that's not using pesticides. There's a lot of manual weed pulling, as I've been speaking to one of our farming partners this week. The shade growing process, and putting out the shades every spring. And these tea leaves are only harvested once a year when you're getting a really high grade matcha. So that all comes at a cost, and the cost really reflects generations upon generations of knowledge of the tea craft. It reflects all of the soul of the tea farmers and the labour that's gone into this really carefully created tea. And I really do think that you will get what you pay for with matcha, and the health benefits that can be offered by a beautifully shade grown and carefully prepared matcha tea. And yeah, that's, I guess, my 5 tips on looking for a really nice ceremonial grade matcha. So again, to recap, that's colour, aroma, texture, taste, and your cost. So at this stage, I would love to show you what a whipped bowl of ceremonial grade matcha tea looks like. So I'm just going to prepare it now for you. And feel free at this point to pop any questions in the Q&A panel if you have any. So a couple of the tools I'm going to use to prepare a bowl of tea are a tea scoop or cha shakru. We need a chasen or a tea whisk. And of course a tea bowl. And you might be surprised at the size of this. It's much bigger than a teacup. And the reason for preparing in a tea bowl, as you'll see in just a moment, is that we're whisking the tea. So we need that space to whisk. We're going to use a tea strainer, which is really important to get out any lumps in the tea. And the reason the tea powder can just lump together sometimes in the pouch is it's a very fine powder, really, really silky fine, and static electricity can just cause it to come together. So by breaking it through a tea strainer, we give us the best chance of creating a creamy bowl. And then of course, we've got our matcha green tea. So Sakucha's matcha is from Uji, Japan, which is a tea growing region with over 800 years of history and is renowned to be the best matcha in the world. We, as I said, work directly with an organic tea farm. This is a single origin, single cultivar tea, and the cultivar is at Okumijori. And we actually package our tea in home compostable tea pouches. So it was very important for us to find a sustainable option, given that I really do believe that tea can connect us more deeply with nature, as well as ourselves and others. And in connecting with nature, I think we come to appreciate how important it is to look after our environment. And when we're consuming tea on a regular basis, especially daily, like I am, I really wasn't comfortable with producing more waste. So I knew we had to find a zero waste option. And the really great thing about the pouch is also the labels are crafted with FSC certified paper, non-toxic glues and inks, and are manufactured in a solar powered facility in Australia. So making a bowl of tea, I'm going to take 2 scoops of our ceremonial grade matcha and filter it into the tea bowl. And I'm going to quickly whip it together so you can see the texture. You have a little scoop, so I'm going to do a little bit more. And you'll get a feel for what your perfect bowl of tea looks like as you start preparing tea for yourself. And as a guide in the tea room, we always offer about 2 grams or 2 scoops of tea as a standard bowl. But I really encourage people to take a mindful and personal approach to preparing tea and to work out whether you like it lighter or more rich. So I've just sifted the tea powder into the bowl here. You can see. And that's just the dry powder swimming now. And now we'll add some water at around 80 degrees to avoid bringing out more bitterness in the tea. Just using now my chusen, I'm going to bring it all together and hopefully end up with a beautiful foam on top. I'm sorry you can't see this very well. I'm sitting on the table so I can still have the computer here, but I will show you the final result. Let me bring it up. So I've just been whisking away and you'll see that's created a really beautiful layer of foam on top. And it's really surprising how creamy matcha can be without any milk, any added sweetener. And that's just water and tea powder with a really lovely texture. And that's the tea there. And so you'll find that when you do get a really good ceremonial grade matcha, you can easily create this foam because of how fine the particles of tea powder are. So I hope you enjoyed our presentation on ceremonial grade matcha and what to look for. And I'd love to answer any questions that you have, so we can jump into the Q&A. I've just had a question. Can you type the name of the tea in the chat? Yeah, of course I can. So this is our organic ceremonial grade matcha. And yeah, we can link you into all of that information.
Hi, Kelsey. Thank you so much for that very informative presentation about matcha. And there's some popularity with your presentation because we've got actually a few questions up in the Q&A.
I'm looking forward to answering them.
I think there's obviously the new, I don't know if it's a trend or something, but what we're seeing a lot more of out in the cafes is this matcha latte. What is it? How is it different? And one of the main question is that double caffeine? Doubly caffeinated because it's a matcha and a coffee.
Yeah, really great question. So a matcha latte has become very, very popular, and you'll see them all over cafe menus. Typically, it's not a mix of matcha and coffee. What it will be is this matcha powder mixed with steamed milk, as like a coffee latte would be. So effectively, instead of a coffee shot, it'll be a shot of matcha or matcha powder steamed with the milk. So basically, the key differences between what we've prepared here, which is a ceremonial grade matcha whipped with water, and a matcha latte, is that lattes will generally have a lower grade tea powder involved. So to be something like what we see on this side, because it's a lower grade tea that tends to be more bitter, you really do need to add milk and sweetener to enjoy this. Otherwise, it can be quite overwhelming for the palate, that kind of astringency and bitterness. And if you try to prepare something like this with just water, it's not very pleasant. So that's usually masked with a sweet milk and, a sweetener that goes with it, and that makes it much more palatable. You will still get some of the benefits of matcha tea, but you won't get the necessarily the high levels of L-theanine and the antioxidants and chlorophyll that you get in a really well-grown, shade-grown green tea. So that's the key differences. It's going to be a really great place for people to start with matcha if you're finding that your palate isn't used to the kind of fresh vegetal taste of matcha, to start kind of trying it with a latte, and then you might like to move into a whipped tea. But yeah, I much prefer tea just with water.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
in a very simple way. As you can see, it didn't take much to whip this creamy bowl, and I didn't have to steam milk and add sweeteners, and all of that can actually, talking about the cost as the fifth point, it can be very tempting to go for a lower grade, but by the time you add the milk and the sweetener, it's not that, much cheaper than going for something that you can simply prepare with water. So I hope that answers your question on the latte, and the difference between the two.
Yeah, yeah, no, that was really good. Now you actually brought us to the next question. So, one of our audience said she's never really tried matcha and would like to.
Mm,
So what type of matcha would you recommend for her to try first? Now you did say maybe, yeah, you can go for the low grade in the latte sort of form. But I guess if you want to go straight into the high grade sort of matcha, obviously we would like to promote yours. So
yeah.
go to Kelsey's stall and see what she's got on offer. But otherwise, what sort of, I guess, terminology would you want to look out for when you're out there looking out for some matcha? She said most adventurous she's ever been
Mm.
is in green tea.
And green tea, beautiful. Okay, well, if you do like green tea, the really nice thing about matcha is that similar. It's matcha is a green tea. It's just in a powdered form, and it actually also has more kind of sweetness and savoury notes because of the shade growing process. A leaf green tea can be much more on the bitter side. So if you're actually familiar with those flavours, I think you're really going to like matcha. I hope so. What I would suggest is, even if I would still go for a high quality ceremonial grade matcha, because you're going to reap the health benefits. You know that it's shade grown, it's high in nutrients, it's got the beautiful flavors. And then just start experimenting with your tea. So prepare your tea with some water like this and try it in the traditional way. If you're finding it too rich, then you can always use less tea powder, you can add more water, you could try adding some milk. Nut milks or plant-based milks are best because they don't interfere with the absorption of the nutrition in the tea. And I think the sweetness of plant-based milks really complements the matcha tea as well. So that would be my recommendation, is try it simply with water, and then play from there, from that standard kind of preparation of the 2 scoops in the water, and you can kind of adjust.
Lovely, thank you. Now the next question is actually pretty interesting. It says here Japanese matcha masters were very concerned about introducing matcha to the global community,
Mm,
and today it's used in many different ways. So, what are
yeah.
your thoughts on the different ways of using matcha?
Yeah, sure. That's a really interesting question. And as somebody who has deep connections with Japan, I've been studying the language since I was 12, on and off, and I've lived in Kyoto, and I really think it's important, when we're exploring some of these teas and traditions, is to respect where they've come from. And but I also think that the wonderful gifts that they offer, even in the practice of chado, every generation is looking to serve the generation in the present time, and what we can do to give people access to the wonderful health benefits. So I guess I can only speak to my personal experience, but I think it's great to um, acknowledge the traditional roots and to support, as we do, people who are crafting the tea and using those traditions that have been carried for hundreds of years, and to acknowledge where these tea and tools have come from. But I think it's also wonderful to celebrate tea in lots of different ways and to find a personal approach to tea that makes sense to you and the current situation that you have. I imagine, like, the gifts of tea and people who, I'm not sure, your question around tea masters, whether you meant those who practice the art of tea or chado, or whether it's, sometimes we talk about tea masters who have mastered like the culinary side of tea, or tea farmers. But my experience, at least in Japan and in working with communities that we work with, is that people are very happy to share the benefits and the gifts of tea. So yeah, they're my initial thoughts. I would just say, whatever you're doing is, go back to trying to understand where these things have come from and support those who have given us the gifts in our life today.
Yeah, that's true, and I think it's providing the respect of its origins, I guess, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When you are experimenting on those teas, and I think that just brings me to your point of mindful tea practice. That was just interesting. I think in this day and age, we're starting to talk about mindfulness, and like mindful eating or it's out there. It's a nice new trendy word now to use. But actually, do you find that you do need to actually put in a little bit of effort and work into being truly mindful in the tea practice, and how do you do it? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a bit on that. It's something I'm very passionate about. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a yoga meditation teacher, and I've been really dedicating myself to understanding mindfulness so that I can also share the gifts that I've experienced in Japan. And it is a very trendy word at the moment, but it's also mindfulness comes from some very ancient traditions, and I think mindfulness is an innate quality that every human being has. And I think, in every culture, every person, we can experience mindfulness. It's probably just something that's become a little lost in the busyness of our daily life. So through Sakucha, I'm really passionate about helping people find moments of mindfulness in their day, moments of rest and refreshment through tea. And why I think tea is a wonderful way to do that is mindfulness is about being aware in the present moment and having this attitude of being non-judgmental. And it can be really difficult to kind of get that space in our day. But a lot of us are waking up and having a tea or a coffee or something like this. And I just think putting those two together, where we can put our full attention into the process of making a bowl of tea, not only does it give us that mindful moment, I think it respects, the people who've crafted the tea. And it's a really great combination. If you're looking to explore mindfulness practices, some of these informal practices where we weave it into our day with a tea practice, or being mindful in walking, we can be mindful when we just take a moment to kind of feel our sensations and come back into our body and be in the present moment. So if you'd love to explore mindfulness through tea, that's what we're all about. So please connect with us, and we're really looking forward to soon offering more guided mindfulness practices through tea. So do stay connected. If you're in Sydney, we're exploring tea and mindfulness through some outdoor tea gatherings in the coming months. So you might want to come to those. Yeah.
Oh, that would be lovely. Oh, we'll invite you to Melbourne. Well, I'm in Melbourne. So I'd love it if you do come down, and we'll do a Melbourne tea, mindful tea practice outdoors. It would be nice. And just on that, I guess it's the last question here, and I think it just blends in with the mindfulness of tea drinking. It says here, hi Kelsey, culturally, is there a time of day when it's best to enjoy the matcha tea?
I wasn't sure about the word culturally. I hope I can answer your question. So I think about it in a couple of different ways, about the kind of physical properties of matcha tea. So it still does have quite a bit of caffeine, and that's why I like it, because I used to drink a lot of coffee. Coffee just gave me the jitters, made me unfocused. The nice thing about matcha is that it has half the caffeine of coffee or less, depending on how it's grown and prepared, how much powder you put in your bowl. But the other great thing is that it comes along with that the L-theanine, which is that amino acid that calms the brain and enhances alpha brain waves. And this is the kind of state that we get into when we practice mindfulness. We start to slow down the brain waves and really create a calm yet focused state. So it's no surprise that Buddhists and monks and a lot of, they've been drinking powdered tea with their meditation for a long time, because it gets them in that focused but calm state. So this is why I think matcha is a great way to start the day. It's really the perfect way to prime yourself for if you're having a formal meditation practice or a yoga practice before work. I just find that I'm much more steady and not jittery and all over the place like I am with coffee. So I would say try to keep your matcha before noon, just because caffeine does have like a long half life, and I really think that sleep and quality sleep is really important for our well-being. So what I would do in the afternoon is go into some of our other Japanese teas like genmaicha or even hojicha, which is roasted and has virtually no caffeine. And we also have hojicha in a powdered form. So if you'd like to have some sort of latte and like ritual in the afternoon, or just enjoy some tea in the afternoon, I would say go with hojicha. Yeah, and in saying that though, chaji or like tea gatherings sometimes happen at night, and I also study tea with my teacher in Japan in the evening. And once a week I drink matcha at night time, which isn't always the best for sleep, but it's what we practice. So
Yeah.
it happens sometimes.
Just a little enjoyment, isn't it? Yeah.
Enjoy lunch and go with it, but I would say morning is optimal.
Okay, morning. Well, I think that's all the questions that we've got for Kelsey at the moment. Kelsey, again, thank you so much for that talk. Again, I'm quite naive about the difference in green teas, and you've just taught me quite a bit about matcha now. And I particularly enjoy the mindful tea practice that you mentioned. So I'll probably be reaching out to you about that soon. All right. Thank you again, everybody, for that. And we'll have a quick sort of 5-minute break while we'll organize for the next presenter. All right. We'll see you soon.
Thanks so much. Thank you.